You may not be talking anymore, you may not even see each other, but if your heart feels heavy for no clear reason, this message is for you. When two people disconnect emotionally without closure, the pain doesn't disappear, it stays silent, deep, and confusing. Today we'll understand why both of you are hurting, even though neither of you is reaching out. Emotional separation is often misunderstood as emotional detachment. People assume that once communication ends, feelings should naturally disappear, but the human mind does not work on command. Attachment is not switched off simply because two people stop talking. When an emotional bond is formed, it is stored in the brain as a sense of safety, familiarity, and emotional reference. Even when the relationship ends, that internal reference remains active. Attachment is created through repeated emotional experiences, shared conversations, emotional support, routines, inside jokes, and vulnerability, all wire the brain to associate one person with comfort or emotional regulation. When that person is suddenly removed, the brain experiences a form of emotional withdrawal. This is why silence hurts more than arguments. Arguments still maintain connection, but silence removes access to the emotional anchor. Emotional separation creates confusion because logic and emotion operate differently. Logically, you may understand why things ended. Emotionally, the brain still expects the presence of the other person. This mismatch creates internal tension. You might feel pain without being able to explain it, restlessness without a clear cause, or sudden emotional waves triggered by memories, places, or even random thoughts. Another reason attachment survives separation is because the mind seeks emotional continuity. Humans are not comfortable with abrupt endings. When there is no proper emotional closure, the brain keeps the attachment alive, hoping for resolution. This is why people often replay conversations in their head or imagine alternative outcomes. It is the mind's attempt to process what was never emotionally completed. Emotional attachment also strengthens when identity becomes involved. When someone becomes part of your emotional routine, your sense of self adjusts around them. Their absence creates a gap, not just in your life, but in your internal emotional structure. You don't only miss the person, you miss the version of yourself that existed with them. This loss is deeply unsettling and intensifies emotional attachment even after separation. Time alone does not dissolve attachment, awareness does. Without emotional processing, distance can actually intensify longing. The brain idealizes what is missing, focusing on emotional highs rather than realistic dynamics. This is why emotional separation can sometimes increase attachment instead of reducing it, especially when feelings were suppressed rather than expressed. People often judge themselves for still feeling attached after separation, labeling it as weakness. In reality, it is a normal psychological response. Attachment is not proof of love or compatibility, it is proof of emotional imprinting. Understanding this helps reduce self-blame and confusion. Emotional separation removes physical presence, but attachment lives in memory, conditioning, and unmet emotional needs, continuing to exist long after the connection ends. Unspoken feelings do not disappear, they turn inward. When emotions are not expressed, the mind has no external outlet to process them, so they remain active internally. This creates psychological pressure. People often believe silence protects them from vulnerability, but emotionally, silence increases the burden. The heart carries what the voice never released, and over time, this weight becomes pain. When feelings remain unspoken, the brain continues to search for expression. Thoughts replay repeatedly, conversations are imagined, and emotions surface at unexpected moments. This is not overthinking, it is unresolved emotion demanding attention. The mind is wired to resolve emotional experiences, and when expression is blocked, the system stays in a loop, unable to move forward. Internal pain develops because unspoken feelings create emotional contradiction. On the outside, a person may appear calm, controlled, or detached, while internally they experience longing, regret, or sadness. Maintaining this emotional split requires effort. Over time, suppressing emotions drains mental energy, leading to irritability, fatigue, and emotional numbness. The pain is not always dramatic. Often it is quiet and persistent. Fear plays a major role in emotional silence. Fear of rejection, fear of appearing weak, fear of disturbing the other person, or fear of facing the truth keeps emotions locked inside. Ego often disguises this fear as self-respect or strength. In reality, avoidance does not protect emotional health, it delays healing. What is avoided emotionally does not dissolve, it accumulates. Unspoken feelings also intensify attachment. When emotions are not expressed, they are not tested against reality. The mind fills gaps with assumptions, imagined responses, and idealized outcomes. This creates a stronger emotional charge than actual interaction would. Silence allows feelings to grow without boundaries, making the emotional experience heavier and more consuming. Another source of internal pain is the loss of emotional validation. Expression allows emotions to be acknowledged, either accepted or rejected. Silence denies this validation. Without acknowledgement, the mind remains unsure of where it stands, which prolongs emotional discomfort. Uncertainty is more painful than clarity, even when clarity is difficult. Over time, unspoken emotions can transform into physical sensations. Tightness in the chest, heaviness in the heart, restlessness, or unexplained sadness are common manifestations. The body responds to emotional suppression because emotions are not only psychological, they are physiological experiences. When not expressed, they seek release through the body. Internal pain from unspoken feelings is often misunderstood as weakness or emotional dependency. In reality, it is the natural consequence of emotional awareness without expression. The more deeply someone feels, the more intense the internal experience becomes when those feelings remain unspoken. Emotional pain is not created by love alone, but by love that was never allowed to speak. Ego and fear often work together to prevent reconnection, even when emotional attachment remains strong. Ego presents itself as self-respect, dignity, or strength, while fear hides beneath it, quietly influencing decisions. When communication ends, ego steps in to protect the self from potential rejection, and fear reinforces that protection by highlighting everything that could go wrong if contact is reinitiated. Fear of rejection is one of the strongest emotional barriers. Reaching out means risking vulnerability, and vulnerability exposes a person to the possibility of being ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood. The mind associates this risk with emotional pain, so it chooses silence as a safer alternative. Ego then rationalizes this silence by convincing the person that staying quiet preserves control or power. Ego also feeds on comparison and assumptions. One may believe that reaching out first signals weakness or lower value. Thoughts like, if they cared, they would contact me, become mental justifications. These beliefs are rarely based on reality. They are defense mechanisms designed to protect the ego from feeling unwanted. Both individuals may be thinking the same thing, waiting for the other to make the first move. Fear also amplifies negative imagination. The mind creates scenarios of awkward conversations, emotional exposure, or rejection, even without evidence. These imagined outcomes feel real to the nervous system, triggering anxiety. As a result, avoidance feels emotionally safer than confrontation, even though avoidance prolongs emotional discomfort. Another way ego blocks reconnection is through unresolved resentment. When hurt has not been processed, ego uses emotional memory as armor. It reminds the person of past pain to justify distance. Instead of addressing the hurt directly, ego preserves it as a reason to stay disconnected. This keeps emotional wounds active while preventing healing conversations from taking place. Pride can also interfere with emotional honesty. Admitting that you miss someone or still care requires self-awareness and humility. Ego resists this admission because it challenges the image of emotional independence. The need to appear unaffected often outweighs the desire for emotional resolution, leading to prolonged silence despite internal longing. Fear of change further reinforces this barrier. Reconnection brings uncertainty. It could lead to reconciliation, closure, or deeper emotional exposure. The unknown feels threatening to a mind that prefers predictable pain over unpredictable outcomes. Even suffering becomes familiar, and familiarity feels safer than emotional risk. Both ego and fear create an illusion of control through inaction. Not reaching out feels like maintaining boundaries, but internally it keeps emotions unresolved. The heart waits while the mind hesitates, trapped between desire and self-protection. When ego and fear dominate, reconnection is not blocked by lack of feeling, but by the inability to tolerate emotional vulnerability. Familiarity develops quietly through repetition. Daily conversations, shared routines, emotional availability, and predictable responses train the mind to expect a certain person as part of emotional regulation. Over time, this familiarity becomes psychologically comforting. The brain associates that person with stability, understanding, and emotional grounding, even if the relationship itself had flaws. Emotional dependency does not always mean weakness or lack of independence. Often it forms when someone becomes the primary source of emotional reassurance. When you are repeatedly heard, understood, or emotionally supported by the same person, the mind learns to rely on that connection. This reliance happens gradually, without conscious intention, making it difficult to recognize until the connection is disrupted. When familiarity is suddenly removed, the emotional system reacts strongly. The brain struggles to adjust because its established patterns are broken. Simple moments, wanting to share something, needing comfort, or seeking validation, trigger a sense of absence. The pain comes not only from missing the person, but from the loss of emotional routine that once provided consistency. Familiarity also reduces emotional uncertainty. Knowing how someone will respond, what they will say, and how they will react creates a sense of predictability. The nervous system prefers predictability because it reduces anxiety. Even in relationships that included conflict, familiarity often feels safer than emotional unfamiliarity. This is why people sometimes miss relationships that were emotionally unhealthy. Emotional dependency intensifies when identity becomes intertwined with the connection. Shared habits, mutual understanding, and emotional roles shape how a person sees themselves within the relationship. When the relationship ends, that internal structure collapses, creating confusion and emotional instability. You are not only adjusting to someone's absence, but also redefining how you emotionally function without them. The mind often confuses familiarity with love. Familiar emotional patterns feel deeply comforting, so their absence creates distress. This can lead to idealization of the past, where emotional comfort is remembered more vividly than emotional difficulty. The brain highlights what is missing rather than what was problematic, strengthening emotional attachment. Another factor is emotional conditioning. The brain learns through reward. When emotional needs are consistently met by the same person, their presence becomes emotionally rewarding. Once that reward is removed, the brain experiences emotional deprivation similar to withdrawal. This does not reflect emotional weakness. It reflects how deeply the mind adapts to repeated emotional experiences. Letting go of emotional dependency requires rebuilding emotional familiarity within oneself and across broader connections. Without awareness, the mind continues seeking the same emotional comfort in memory, maintaining attachment through familiarity alone. Familiarity does not disappear easily because it is embedded in emotional habit, neural pathways, and internal expectation, continuing to influence emotional responses long after the relationship ends. When a connection ends, logic and emotion begin to operate in opposite directions. Logic analyzes facts, reasons, and outcomes, while emotion responds to attachment, memory, and feeling. When both remain active without resolution, a person feels internally divided. One part understands why separation happened, while the other continues to feel pulled toward what once felt emotionally safe. Logic focuses on self-protection. It recalls the reasons for distance, the arguments, the incompatibilities, or the unmet expectations. It tells the mind that moving on is necessary, that reopening the connection could cause more pain. Emotion, however, does not respond to explanations. It responds to emotional imprinting, comfort, and familiarity. This creates constant internal conflict. This conflict leads to emotional paralysis. People hesitate to act because whichever side they choose feels wrong. Acting on emotion feels risky and irrational. Acting on logic feels emotionally empty and unsatisfying. As a result, many remain stuck in inaction, thinking about the connection without moving toward it or fully letting it go. Emotion often resurfaces unexpectedly. A memory, a song, a place, or a random moment can trigger feelings that logic believed were resolved. This confuses the mind and creates self-doubt. A person may question their strength or progress, not realizing that emotional memory operates independently of rational understanding. Logic also creates guilt around emotional attachment. Thoughts like, I shouldn't feel this way anymore, or I know better than this, intensify internal pressure. Instead of allowing emotions to process naturally, logic tries to suppress them. Suppressed emotion does not disappear. It waits for moments of vulnerability to resurface more strongly. At the same time, emotion resists logical closure. Emotional attachment often hopes for change, understanding, or emotional repair. It focuses on potential rather than reality. Logic may know that reconciliation is unlikely or unhealthy, yet emotion clings to what could have been rather than what was. This keeps the heart engaged while the mind remains guarded. Both individuals can experience this same struggle simultaneously. Each may believe the other has moved on because neither expresses their emotional conflict. Silence reinforces misunderstanding. Logic assumes distance equals detachment, while emotion continues to experience longing privately. The longer this internal conflict continues, the more exhausting it becomes. Mental energy is consumed by constant evaluation, self-questioning, and emotional regulation. The person feels stuck, unable to fully grieve or fully reconnect. This tension can lead to emotional numbness, where neither logic nor emotion feels satisfying. Being stuck between logic and emotion is not indecision. It is unresolved integration. Until both are acknowledged rather than forced to compete, internal peace remains out of reach. The mind and heart continue pulling in opposite directions, keeping the person emotionally suspended between what they know and what they feel. Emotional honesty requires acknowledging what is actually felt, not what should be felt. Many people attempt to heal by convincing themselves that they are fine, strong, or unaffected, while internally experiencing sadness, longing, or confusion. This disconnect delays healing. The mind cannot process emotions that are denied. Healing begins only when emotions are named and accepted without judgment. Honesty with oneself is often more difficult than honesty with others. Admitting emotional attachment, disappointment, or regret challenges the self-image of control and emotional independence. Yet avoiding these admissions keeps emotions active beneath the surface. What is unacknowledged continues to influence behavior, thoughts, and emotional reactions in subtle but persistent ways. Emotional honesty does not mean acting on every feeling. It means recognizing them accurately. Feeling pain does not require reaching out. Feeling longing does not require reconciliation. Awareness separates emotion from impulse. When emotions are acknowledged internally, they lose their urgency and intensity over time, allowing clearer decision-making. Many people confuse healing with forgetting. In reality, healing is integration. It involves understanding what the connection represented emotionally and why it mattered. Honest reflection reveals emotional patterns, unmet needs, and personal vulnerabilities that became attached to the relationship. Without this understanding, similar attachments repeat themselves in different forms. Emotional honesty also involves accepting discomfort. Healing is not a pleasant process. It often includes moments of sadness, grief, and emotional release. Avoiding discomfort prolongs emotional pain, while allowing it to be felt gradually reduces its intensity. Emotions move when they are allowed, not when they are resisted. Another aspect of emotional honesty is releasing emotional narratives. People often tell themselves stories to avoid pain, such as blaming timing, circumstances, or external factors. While these narratives offer temporary comfort, they prevent deeper emotional clarity. Honest healing requires confronting reality, even when it challenges emotional hopes. Being emotionally honest means recognizing emotional limits as well. It involves understanding whether reconnection would heal or reopen wounds. This clarity comes from emotional awareness, not from fear or ego. When honesty replaces avoidance, decisions become grounded rather than reactive. Healing also requires patience with emotional timing. Logic often demands quick recovery, while emotion operates at its own pace. Emotional honesty respects this difference. It allows space for gradual emotional adjustment rather than forced closure. Over time, honesty reduces emotional intensity by removing internal resistance. When emotional honesty becomes a practice, the relationship with pain changes. Pain is no longer something to escape, but something to understand. Through this understanding, emotional attachment loosens naturally, clarity increases, and the heart regains stability without denial or suppression.